in this area is in danger of being polluted. We have a responsibility as the protectors of the headwaters of the Mississippi River to make better decisions because we are impacting people between here and the Gulf of Mexico. We have a responsibility to make decisions not for economic reasons, but for the health and welfare of the people so the people can live. Consider this. If all of the water was polluted, the people would die. If all of the people went away, the water would flourish.
Spring Valley Friends has been engaged with local First Nations groups, We Are Still Here Minnesota, and the American Indian Movement in response to the crisis of development and to understand truth of the sacredness of the Spring area, acknowledging Dakota territory and learning the area was called Nini Wakan in historical record.
Amitakiapi, Dakota ia Chetaska wa Chinwika to Shunka wa Peoe Amakiapia. My English name is Janice Badmoccasin. Crow Creek, Hechia Tahawahia. I am from the Crow Creek, Hunkpati, Oyate, the nation. I live in Shakopee, Minnesota. I've been here since 1983 and actively supporting Oyate Nipikte, a spiritual movement for the well-being and spiritual wellness in our Native communities. You know, go back to our oral stories of land and history and connection. These waters right away had, really gave me a connection here. You know, some natives grow up with trauma and I'm one of them, and I really healed with a lot of our ceremonies, and water was always a part of that ceremony.
I know on a personal level, when I don't drink the water, I feel zapped and drained. And when I drink it, I kind of come to life. It re-energizes me and it tastes really good. And I want my children and grandchildren to experience that too.
We like to come out here and, ground with the earth, let the water or let the ground, take the energy, that negative energy, that forget that this water and this land is sacred, that it's, a lot of times gets forgotten, it gets, mistreated, it gets, and I kind of realize that.
Constantly there's people coming to get this medicine and filling their jugs, taking it home. I do that now. I come and take some water, put some tobacco, give thanks. It's reciprocal, as when we give thanks to the water, the element, and we take. So I think there's maybe just taking and no reciprocal giving back. And I want them to experience that this is where your health comes from, is the land.
Land surrounding the spring has been recognized by the Department of Natural Resources as one of the last remaining prairie remnants. Comments from the DNR recommend that the land be brought to preservation.
I founded Friends of Coldwater in 01, and we're trying to save the last natural spring in the city. Minneapolis has lost the Great Medicine Spring in Theodore Wirth Park and also Glenwood Spring for development of Interstate 394 west out of the city.
There's two threats. One is the development arriving,
and the natural context of the space disappearing. I see so many children and families taking the time to walk around and touch the water, to play, to meditate, the things that I've seen that happen immediately around that space. The city's plans after development comes will be dealing with that much more pollution, people, impervious surfaces, and we'll be missing the natural aspect of the space.
The spring is a local heritage preservation site. However, that heritage is specific to the settlers. What is missing from this history? There is a deeper truth that needs to be faced and understanding the cultural significance of this site.
Flawed engineering in the development plans puts the area at risk to landslide, jeopardizing the land. Archaeological testing on the property is insufficient, and there are suspected cultural resources that need to be accounted for.
As a part of the Spring Valley Friends group, I've done a lot more research about this area and found that we have ancestors buried here. And I also see very old cemeteries in the urban Minneapolis area, mainly like on Lake Street. And I think you'd think they'd want to put condos there, right? But they won't, because why? And then here, it's kind of the same thing, but nobody's recognizing that, and that hurts.
Incremental development has been eating away at the prairie remnants and the known cemeterial mounds. In 2013, Pulte Homes built Reeder Ridge. Amongst the mounds, a cultural easement was established. Currently, residential lawn furniture sits on top of ancestors. We can look to St. Paul as a city that collaborated with First Nations to bring dignity to sacred burial sites. City of Eden Prairie's land acknowledgement indicates a commitment to learn the history of the land Eden Prairie is built on, to recognize, support, collaborate with, and advocate for Indigenous people, and to consider the convergence of legacies. We are still waiting.
This is one of the first medicines that's going to sustain us, as human beings. So I'm really growing to really care for this place, care for this area where our people probably walked, they left their imprints of, this is a beautiful place.
I'll say if you're a heritage person or someone who has privileges that came from colonialism, just take the invitation to let your guard down a little bit. And I'd say that's the most amazing thing for me has been being uncomfortable, allowing myself to be opened up into a richer life by examining these things in myself and taking accountability.
totally okay to clap. So I'd love to invite up to the stage right now, Ramona Kitto Statley. Yeah.
Good evening. I already made my Dakota introduction, so I won't do that again, but I am so excited to be here. I am so excited that your school is doing this kind of like immersive and experiential learning, like kudos to your teachers. So I am Ramona Kitto Statley, and I am a Dakota scholar, and I went back and I got my master's degree in education. And it wasn't to learn more about our education system, but to interrupt it and go back and stand behind programs like these. So today, it's really important that our job as teachers is to raise students who have really good, strong critical thinking skills, because you guys are our future leaders. It's so important that we make sure you understand how to problem solve, how to bring in all the information that there is and weigh it and make a decision against it or about it. But we don't teach you that, because we teach you one way of knowing, and it's this Western way from a white guy's point of view with no other inclusions of perspectives. As Dakota people, we say we are we Shakopee Oyate, the star people. We come from the stars, and to the stars we return. It was in the 70s when the science came out on DNA that scientists, Carl Sagan, great scientists said, wow, they're right. These natives, they know something, because we've always said that's where we come from. And in all of our DNA, this is where life begins, these stars from the universe. So it is very, very important that you guys have all different kinds of input while you're making decisions, all the information. And we don't do that so well because we're impacted by testing and things like that. But when I see a program like this, I'm really proud of you guys. And I think it's awesome to always be able to open your heart and your minds to all the information and to make good decisions based on that. So thank you. I'm just gonna listen to your questions and listen to the conversation tonight and see where we go. Thank you for having us. Yes, sir.
What do you think can be done to convince the government not to destroy these burial sites and destroy the culture that lives in this land?
Well, we have a 1984 law. It's called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So they are protected. The problem is, one of the challenges that we have are leaders today don't know those laws. And there's also ways of getting around them. If nobody knows what they're doing up there, I mean, they could have just passed that. If nobody knows what they're doing, they can get away with it. But there are laws. There are laws that protect against doing that. And if they get it okay approval, or if somebody doesn't go there and say, hey, this is cultural burial land, they can get away with it. I think now they're held up some. Yes.
How can we create a regulatory earth balance? Like if something is to be built, that it has to be in accordance with a balance as a regulatory requirement.
Well, that's a really good question. I think, first of all, we have to kind of go back and repair some of the things that we've already done. You know, we live in an amazing state. Minnesota is one of the, has some of the most richest resources, land, of all the 50 states. Did you guys know that? But the first thing that happened when in statehood was that T.B. Walker of the Walker Art, a lumber baron, clear cut all of the white pine, which was all over our state. What that did is it killed all of the ecosystem that depended on that. And that's from, you know, the soil all the way to the eagles that nested on top, the black bear, the wolf, the elk. So what we have to do as Dakota people, what we've always done, because we lived here for 14,000 years. When it left our hands, it was pure. What we have to do is think of the water, think of the living things, the plants as our relatives, not as resources. We can't have that thought about how it's going to make us money because it's going to hurt us. We have to think of it as relatives, and then we make different decisions about it. But I imagine we have to come to a time when we consider what is the impact and how do we balance it. I don't know how. I know now we need to do some reparations. Yes, sir.
And obviously we're holding events like this that are spreading awareness, but how do you think a community like obviously your community and then the Shakopee community, and not only that but also the Eden Prairie community, could spread awareness to issues like this? And how do you think that we could get this to be possibly bigger than what it already is to possibly stop this?
So that's a really good question. So how do we get our tribal communities to? Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of facts, and then I'm going to ask you how many of you knew them, okay? So for here, the Shakopee Badewa Sioux community is the largest employer in Scott County. Now, what other employers are in Scott County? Amazon. Okay. Our 11 tribal nations together are called Minnesota Indian Gaming. Together, our 11 tribal nations are the second largest tourism draw to the state. So imagine the economic impact of our tribal nations. Shakopee Badewa Sioux community has the cleanest water for their citizens in the entire state. So the people can live. Those are the decisions that our people make. And right now, if you've looked on that website, have you? They have an amazing website. Check it out, because I think you'll be surprised. They are right now, because they don't purchase any utilities from Scott County. They provide their own power. So now they're partnering with possibly with Scott County to provide all of the utilities for the entire county. And that all of their decisions are environmental, all of their decisions are for the people, and not just their people, but for all the people, because those are our original instructions. Whenever a decision is made, we have to be able to end it with so the people can live. And I think that's a beautiful kind of way of balancing decision making, right, too? So check out they've got lots of different things going on their website that they talk about, but they are huge contributors to particularly this place, this county. And all 11 are the largest employers in their county, all doing amazing work, huge philanthropic organization, givers, giving a lot of money away, but also they're, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, so my other question I said I was going to ask you, how many of you, just show hands because I just want everyone to look around. How many of you knew those facts? Raise your hand if you knew that fact. Okay, we got an overachiever. No, I'm kidding. We got one guy. Thank you for knowing that. So this is how invisible our tribal nations are. This is how invisible we are. Is that crazy? It's crazy. So does that help to answer your question somewhat? Right. And you know what? That's happened for 159 years because what happened in the state of Minnesota in 1862, now the first book ever came out, it's called Fort Snelling at Badote, where they really talk about the details of what really happened on the Minnesota frontier in 1862. And they say two things because it's a Minnesota Historical Society press book. One is there's no doubt it was genocide. And the second thing is that where the women were taken and kept at Fort Snelling for 6 months was a concentration camp, which has always been, something that they've said. It was a place of holding. No, it wasn't. It was a concentration camp. So there are, and when we are siloing knowledge to you guys, you're just going to go with it, right? Your teachers don't know. If you looked at the hands in the room, they don't know any more than you do about the facts that I just told you. Our brains have the capacity to learn and know so many things. I don't feel like we're doing you justice in teaching you answers to a test. I think there's better ways, and our teachers certainly don't get into the profession to teach you that. We're just kind of stuck. We're in a stuck place. I don't want to go on too long.
So we just had our time, so thank you. What I do want to share is that part of the work, the exploration with the State Historic Preservation Office, what they recommended is that through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, that we ask them to trigger a second investigation of the property that's for sale for the cultural resources. So in navigating how to make change, those are the same questions that we have. And I think one place that we've arrived at is it takes education and conversation. And that's why we're here tonight, is to turn on those light bulbs and say, what else can we do? Because we have a team of people and we're a little tired and we need some more steam behind this. So I really love that question. We are going to transfer and invite Dr. Otto Strak aboard. And also during that time, we're going to have a couple of our other guests that will be speaking a little bit later come up to the table. So Dr. Otto Strak is the landslide guy, the slope stability expert, and we're going to pass it over to him.
Okay, I shared my screen. I'm not sure whether you can see it. Let me know if you're not. So the first slide I have is just introduction, my name, and that I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota. I've been teaching soil mechanics and groundwater flow. So I'm going to talk today very briefly, obviously, because there's not much time, about slope stability. If I can get this, hang on. Just a second, I have to get this. Okay, so slope stability. So soils, what you have to imagine is that soils are consisting of many small particles like sand, for example, and water in between. And the stability of a slope, if you pour sand, out of a bucket, say, when you're on the beach, you can see that it forms a certain slope. That is the natural slope of that particular material, for example, sand. In reality, slopes are not like that. They are, as indicated here in this rightmost slide picture. And when we analyze the stability of these slopes, so what we want to avoid, of course, is that it fails. So an old method, very old, I mean like a century, that describes this is shown here on the right-hand side. Let me get my cursor over here. So this picture here shows you an assumed slip surface like this red line. And what we then do is make an analysis of the weights of various portions of that slope and the forces that keep it in place and see whether it fails. Now, that is as I said, it's a very old method and it relies on beforehand assuming this surface, which you really don't know, it's a guess. And there are much more advanced techniques here. On the left-hand side is a completely different application of a computer model that actually can compute by looking through the forces that are acting and the dynamics. Dynamics means that forces are changing, for example, if it rains very hard or if a truck drives over the slope, and actually constructs itself what that surface looks like. So this is a far more reliable way to analyze the slope if it's important enough. It's more expensive, a much more demanding kind of analysis. But this is the analysis that was applied in this case. And I'm concerned about that, first of all, because it assumes everything is static. And the main concern that I have, and I've had that from looking through these the designs, this is from one of the reports that are available. This is a plan view. So if you look at these contours, these are contours of constant altitude, like you are familiar with maps and so on. So this is what is called an infiltration pond. So when you do these developments in a sloping area like here, this is a section through this plan view. So AA is this section that goes from here to the right and looks at it from the side. And you see here's a pond that is meant to infiltrate stormwater into the slope or into the soil, because you have to do something with it. And so it's generally a good way, but it's not a good way when you do that halfway through a slope. Because what happens is that when this fills quickly and the soil is already saturated, the increase in pressure goes very quickly into the soil. And the problem is, if you think of, excuse me? Did somebody ask a question? No? Shall I continue? Okay, so what happens is you get the water and the soil together, so you have the water in between the particles, and if the pressure in the water goes up, the forces then in between the particles become less, and that causes eventually failure, or there's a very good chance that it causes failure. That's the same sort of thing as you see when you think of quicksand. In that case too, you have water and soil, and if the pressures in the water get too high, then the soil sort of collapses. And that's a concern that I've had since I looked at this, because it's part of the analysis that was not done. It was not considered, and it should be. So this is from the report that was the report on the analysis that was done. And you see here, this is the slope, the failure surface of the slope that was assumed. This is the pond with the lining that permits water to go down. And so the increase in pressures really don't see this slope, would rather do something down here and are simply not considered. And I'm very concerned because that is the sort of thing that really can cause failure of a slope. You get these enormous rainstorms that we have these days. Water level in these infiltration basins go up quickly, and you get dynamic effects that were not taken into account. So my concern is that the possibility for slope failure induced by the water in this way was not considered. And in fact, even if you don't know anything about soil mechanics, you can imagine that if you're halfway in a slope, start injecting water, that could not be a good idea. So that is all I wanted to say. So that's my concern in this business, but I will be happy to answer questions if anybody wants to ask something.
Thank you, Dr. Strak. We're going to be asking questions. I'll be typing them in the window so you make sure that you can see them, okay?
Yeah, let me look here. Okay. Let me stop my presentation because it's a bit in the way here.
Dr. Strak,
Yeah.
what would happen if there was a septic tank not far from this area? And how would that affect the downhill outcome in containing all that? Would that like filter through the ground, or would that run away freely?
Well, that's difficult to say. It's a different effect than what I was talking about with these infiltration ponds, because they're designed to infiltrate. And it depends on how the septic system is designed and where the drain field is. So that really, I couldn't answer the question without seeing more of the design. In the case that I just showed, I could see from the design what would happen, but whether it's, what the septic, that I would really need to see the design to know. But in any case, the effect of water on a slope is always negative. So if you have a slope that has no water, or a slope where the water flows out of the slope, the maximum slope, the natural slope that you could sustain is only half if there's water coming out. So any kind of water is always a concern when it flows through a slope. I mean, it always affects the slope stability negatively.
Hi, Dr. Strak. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
So my question is, just to confirm, are you saying there's really two concerns here? There's one that the testing did not adequately determine the stability of the slope, and that the design that was submitted, there's some concern with where the infiltration basins are and how that reacts with the water that could also cause a slope failure. So there's two different concerns there that are both around the slope stability. Is that right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's correct. So the design of these infiltration ponds, which is a relatively new thing, it's because we have these enormous rainstorms that they become more important. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that the slope stability analysis that was used, in my view, in this important case, is just not sophisticated enough. It can't address, it can only address static. So if nothing is changing, and that is not the case, we have these storms, we have other things, dynamic effects can be very important in this case. So I feel I'm very worried that the analysis hasn't been done thoroughly enough to make sure that we don't get a disaster by having a slope failure, because slope failures are literally disasters. I mean, it can be very, very bad.
So could you, going back to, let's say there was a slope failure in this area, and the creek, as you know, runs very close, and then the basin of the spring is there. If there were to be a landslide, what could be some of the consequences to the creek or potentially development?
Oh, that could be quite significant. I mean, you get, if it really fails, you get a fairly large soil mass moving, and it would certainly move. You would change the course of the stream, it's a major effect. It's not just a little thing, because it is hard to predict just how much of the soil mass will actually slide, but it's something you absolutely don't want to risk. So, and that's, I want to repeat, my main concern is the analysis is inadequate for this case. It has to be thoroughly investigated that it is indeed safe. And if that kind of analysis would show it's not, then the design has to be changed.
Thank you.
We're wrapping up the segment, but we can have one more question. And we also have a student question.
Okay, so when the mayor came to talk to us about this, of Eden Prairie, he mentioned like really tall retaining walls to help with the slope. Do you think those would be effective at all? If not, how would they affect the stability of the slope?
That's a good question. Yeah, no, the retaining walls are to protect the buildings, and they are, when you saw, I showed this cross section through where that infiltration ponds and the slope. The retaining walls are not there, but yes, you raise an important point. Retaining walls are also prone to the same problem. So water forces, water pressures behind the retaining wall. But they were, I must say though, that the design, those parts of the design, I looked through them, I mean, as much as I could for the time I had, but that looked fairly thorough. So I'm a lot less worried about the retaining walls than about the slope itself. And it's also a much more local thing. But that's a good question.
Thank you so much. Dr. Strak will be returning a little bit later for some more open questions. And right now we're going to welcome Dr. Alexander, the groundwater expert. Dr. Alexander.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Let me see if I can share my screen and go to there. Can you now see the screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Go to, I give up. All right. The first one is just the introduction slide. I'm Calvin Alexander. I also have taught at the university about as long as Otto has, and we've known each other for many years. I want to show you here a general map of the area that we're talking about. This is from the Minnesota DNR spring inventory. This is the north side of the Minnesota River Valley. This is Flying Cloud Drive, and the airport's up here. This orange dot is the Fredrick Miller Spring, and the area that we're talking about, the development, is this area right in here. These other yellow dots are other springs that I found in a couple of days. None of these were on the map until we went out and surveyed a few of them this spring. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds of springs all along here. And everything Otto was saying about the infiltration of water and so forth is very true. What I would like to do at this point is talk to you about the water quality in these springs. Literally thousands of people are drinking the water from Fredrick Miller Spring. You've seen a bunch of pictures of people filling up water jugs there. If you've ever been by there, that happens all the time. I have never visited that spring when there weren't people there filling up water jugs. This spring falls in a weird kind of gap. It's not owned by the city, it's not owned by the state, and so nobody is responsible for it in a weird way. The health department doesn't monitor its water quality. The city claims to be monitoring for nitrates occasionally, but I've never been able to get a hold of the data. And so this is a public water supply but nobody can tell you what the water quality is, what its chemistry is, where it's coming from. And so these are big blank questions. And one of the big gaps to my mind is that we need to know a lot more about the water quality, where it's coming from, before we can really begin to understand this, and we can protect the people who are drinking this water every day. The other thing I would like to show you is just to emphasize Dr. Strak's talk. This is not a hypothetical situation. There are big landslides along this north side of the Minnesota River Valley. This is just a little west of the spring in the Richard T. Anderson area. You can see this one from just driving down Blind Cloud Drive. What happened here is a big chunk of the land has slipped away, collapsed down. These trees that you can see in here used to be standing up here. This is a giant landslide. Now, the question is, do you want to build houses on top of this? This is a Google Earth image of the same area. The landslide that I was showing you a moment ago is right down here. This is back in. This is a big fault scarp and landslide. This is another big fault scarp and landslide. These are houses that are built on top. You can see the roads going here. This fault scarp is within a few tens of feet of this house. And this is the way that these kinds of landslides occur in here. And to my mind, this, in total support of what Otto was just saying, this is not a reasonable place to build houses, period. What happens when one of these houses collapses in one of these landslides? Who is responsible for it? Do you have landslide insurance? This is just really a dangerous area to be expanding on. So to go back to my first point, I continue just to be shocked that nobody is, that I can't tell you what the water quality in the Fredrick Miller Spring is, because nobody knows. And it should be determined. It should be part of a study. The water level in the lower aquifers is higher than the spring itself. So this could easily be some sort of artesian spring. We simply don't know. So my basic message is there is almost zero information to start talking about the water quality in a spring that thousands and thousands of people are drinking. And I don't think this is a good idea. And I'll take questions from there.
Hi, Mr. Alexander. So when it comes to the landslide image that we see up on the screen, I've noticed that it's obviously, as you said, gotten very close to the houses. So I guess my question is how long would it take for, that landslide to eventually reach the houses and do massive damage to the people living there?
It could happen this evening. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen 10 years from now. It could happen 100 years from now. There's no, I don't know of any good way to predict these. They are catastrophic events when they occur, and they are sudden events. So all I can do from the field work is say this is a phenomenon that is happening on a human time scale in this area.
Hello, Dr. Alexander. I had a few months back, I had read about a 2014 landslide event in Eden Prairie. Do you have any insight about what caused it and what exactly happened there?
The simple answer is no. I am not familiar with that particular landslide, and I haven't seen any write-up or any investigation of it. And I don't know if such exist, and I just haven't seen them. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. My question is, in addition to the lack of assessment around the high water level and the dynamic system around that retaining wall and retention pond, there has been no assessment of the vegetation loss impact on the slope stability. There are 455 or so trees, many heritage with significant root depth and diameter, that have not been examined. Could you please expand on maybe the impacts of removing that many trees and regrading and disturbing over 60% of the soil on the project site, how that relates to landslide or water quality?
I can't respond with any specificity, but I can give you some general concepts. This landscape all along this north side of the valley and all along the valley here is a very delicate dynamic equilibrium. It is just kind of sitting there waiting for something to happen. And as soon as you start taking out trees, grading, building walls, putting retention ponds, all of those are major perturbations on this very delicate equilibrium that currently exists. And that equilibrium is going to change. And that means that things will move. It is not a good idea to be anywhere near the earth when it decides to move. This can be hazardous to your health. And when it decides to move, it moves very quickly. And so you're running a long-term experiment. You're going in and saying, okay, this is what it looks like now. What's it going to look like when it adjusts to us putting a whole bunch of houses here? And we don't know the answer. And the people over here are finding out faster than they want to, probably.
Thank you. Could you also speak to perhaps what study or forms of examination you would recommend in terms of developing a greater understanding of the source of the spring and the quality of the water?
The very first step is to start getting some data about the water quality. A simultaneous step is to start getting data about how much water is coming down the Riley Creek from Riley Lake over here. Again, there's a whole bunch of very obvious things to do that simply haven't been done because the proposers argue that this will not affect the water quality in the spring. And that's just a bald assertion on their point. And we don't have the information or data to argue against that point. The simple answer to your point is start with chemical analysis of the water, find out what the water quality is, find out what the water quality in the Riley Creek is, find out what the water quality is. And there's some wells up on the other side of it. Find out what the water quality of that is, and start doing a realistic measurement of, or trying to figure out where that water is coming from, rather than simply asserting that it's coming from someplace that won't be affected by this. The whole groundwater movement in this area is simply unknown.
Thank you. So with that, we are going to invite Susu, who has some photos that she wanted to share. And after that, we'll be inviting our folks to come up to the main panel for a little bit more open discussion.
This is the same landslide that we just saw. You can see it from Flying Cloud Road. Would you put an $800,000 home up there with those trees? $800,000 home, 50, $800,000 homes? That's really iffy. How did that sand get there? I mean, normally we see hills that are made out of dirt and stone. So how did that sand get there? It got there by the glaciers. When the glaciers came down from up north, they ground everything into sand. The hills, the trees, everything got just simply ground into sand. And then there were about 10,000 years when the glaciers melted, and they carried that sand down and created these sand ridges along the Mississippi and Minnesota valleys. So that's very unstable. And it's a deposit from, thousands of years of ice grinding. You know that when the glaciers came down, they scraped everything down to Missouri, which is why Minnesota had no groundworms. So where'd all the groundworms come from? Fishermen who threw out their bait. We did not have native earthworms here. So we have changed the ecology of the area, we being European Americans, since the get-go. Next slide, please. Aha, what are those little pock marks in that same sandy ridge? Does anybody know what those are? Bird nests. There are these fabulous birds called bank swallows that are really consummate insect eaters on the fly, bugs, bees, wasps, butterflies, moths, caught and eaten on the fly. They're just amazing birds. And they're very social. They nest together. They peck out those nests that are maybe 10 inches into the sand hill. And then the males fly around attracting a female with the wonderful nest building that you can see that he has done. They mate for a season and they eat bugs like you wouldn't believe. So they're our friends because they eat things that bug us in the summertime. These flyers go down to South America for the winter. They're amazing. So if you want to Google them, think about calling them bank swallows. There are lots of different kinds of swallows, but that is simply a close-up of the sand bank that was shown in the previous slide. Next slide, please. Here we are. Up right is someone getting water at the spring outflow, which is in fact heated during the winter because otherwise it would freeze. Where does the water come from? It comes from the hill on the other side of Spring Road. It goes under the road and up and out, and it flows 24/7, 365. And that's why people are there all the time, all the time, all the time. And in the foreground, you see Riley Creek, and you see these trees that have big trees that have fallen down into the creek because sand doesn't hold the tree roots. In the foreground on the right, you see sand, right? This is called erosion. This stream in the 1990s used to be a big trout stream. And then development killed the trout. It's really sad. So how many of you have been up there where Spring Road has that little turnout where you can park for a few minutes or however long you want to stay? How long? All right, lots of people. We had a taste test of several different kinds of spring waters at Coldwater Spring in Minneapolis, which furnished water to Fort Snelling for a century. So we had calcium and magnesium rich water from Coldwater Spring. We had water from this spring, the William Miller Spring, or Mini Wakan, mini water, Wakan sacred. All springs are Mini Wakan. So we had this Mini Wakan spring in our taste test. And south on Flying Crowd Road is the Anderson Spring, which tastes completely different. Each of these springs has very discrete water chemistry because it comes to the surface through different pathways. Think about the veins in your body. You have the arteries like Mississippi River, and then you have the little tiny veins. And all these veins come from somewhere. They travel, they pick up the chemistry from the land that they travel through and deliver it. And it's called medicine. Ramona talked about that. Water is the first medicine. And it's very interesting that when we tasted Coldwater Spring Mini Oasis or this Mini Wakan or Anderson Mini Wakan, they all tasted differently. I mean, it's just amazing, but it's just like your body. Think of the way the veins and arteries flow through your body. Same kinds of systems. Think of tree roots and tree branches. Same thing mirrored. So nature has this long experience of perfecting itself. And when nature gets a good pattern, it's repeated. It's repeated in human beings. It's repeated in the earth. That's why we're all related. So this is called erosion. This is about 20 steps above where you get water at William Miller Spring. And if you just simply go up the path, you will pass, you see the fence is trying to hold you back. And apparently that fence, that bridge is less than 20 years old. That's a lot of rainwater that's pulling down and pooling down into, in this case, Riley Creek. Next time you go to the spring for water, walk up the path. It's just a few steps. It is astonishing how collapsed the place is. Again, would you put your $800,000 home up there? It's iffy. On the right in the middle is a beautiful little tree, and it's toxic as hell, and it's buckthorn. I don't know if you realize which tree I'm talking about. It's on the right in the middle, it's sticking out. That's buckthorn. Buckthorn is a exotic invasive. It comes from Eurasia, and it produces berries that are good for constipation. And the birds eat it and they squirt out viable seeds all over the landscape. And it's a bummer because it shades out indigenous plants. It's a beautiful little tree, but it's killing the landscape. And I think it's kind of hard on the birds too. Next slide, please. This slide is called the horizontal forest. You cannot expect sand to hold trees. It's just impossible. This is what's happening along Riley Creek. The creek, the wonderful creek that just 30 years ago was a great trout stream. The creek above which they want to put $800,000 homes and increase their tax base for Eden Prairie. That slide that we saw of the house near the landslide, that's one of those repeated examples that's going to happen and happen because we have much more devastating rain events than we used to have. It comes down harder and faster. In fact, there's a new word to describe it. It's called a rain bomb. Have you heard of that? The rain bombs? They just come and they bam down on the land, and then the land collapses. And we are having, bigger but fewer rain events here. And we're getting rain bombs. I had a rain bomb in my yard. I lost my back steps in Minneapolis. I couldn't believe it. And the dirt and sand that was under my back steps washed down the street. You could see it. It was a path. And it was like, it was a 15-inch rain. And we're getting these incredible rains. And I want you to see it and really see it. Because once you see it, you have to do something about it. There's a famous quote from Kate Millett from St. Paul, revolutionary woman with a great mouth. And she said, once you know, it's your responsibility. And so, young people, I give it to you to fix. Any questions?
Any questions?
So right now I'm gonna just ask Majora to come up front, Chesney to come up front, Nicole and Buckley Banks family. I just want to let you all see a couple of our other volunteers. Ramona, if you want to come back and have a drink. The idea is that we would have a greater conversation. Our time is getting short, so I want to honor that. But I also want to honor that we brought the water to have some water. And there's also extra cups. So Aspire, if anyone wanted to come up right now and grab, Aspire can help you get some water if you want to drink some. Medora has an announcement. But what I want to say is our group, Medora did test the water, with like a average person water test. Yeah. Okay, and so it came out like everything's healthy to drink at this moment for what we know. So we have one announcement. I want to give a word to Chesney, and then we're going to have our close with Nicole and Wagush.
So we have some stickers here, you can buy them. Oh, sorry. We have some stickers here that you can buy. These will go towards funding the efforts. I also have a volunteer sign-up sheet if anybody wants to work with us in any capacity, any form. We definitely are looking for more people to get involved. So I'm going to pass on to Chesney.
Thank you, Medora. Thank you all for gathering here today. This is a really inspirational event. I am in awe and appreciation of your class and your educators for, empowering the opportunity to convene around your innate wisdom and to explore the power of your inquiry and your curiosity. Susu talked quite a bit about the soil. We heard Ramona speak about our indigenous relations. And so briefly about my background, actually not so many generations ago, my family took part in the initial development of Lake Street. And I think that they did not know, it did not occur to them that the prosperity they had hoped to gain for their family might not last. And that as health being our first wealth, only a few generations later, the water is no longer clear to drink and the air is no longer clear to breathe. And so it is my responsibility, and I learned from the lessons of my ancestors. And I'm here, I want to make sure you all leave today with this soil health handbook so that you can understand, as above, so below. These landslides occur because we are not considering the structure of this incredible, has anyone seen this awesome documentary, Fantastic Fungi? With Paul Stamets, he wears a mushroom hat. He's found that we can solve all the world's problems if we learn how to relate better to mushrooms. It's on Netflix and Amazon, so there's that. But what I have for you today is just a little bit of a lesson on soil, the structure that's underneath in this microscopic fashion. It relates to what happens on a macroscopic level. So when we collapse and degrade that soil, which if you read just a little bit into the history about pioneers coming to settle this very land next to the spring, they report rich soil up to your bootstraps. And so it is that there is no undisturbed soil left, and it is our job to regenerate that soil. So Susu shared, we'll place that in all of our hands to become aware. And I just really appreciate your coming together to question and become a part of a decision-making process that does honor all of our relations, and it honors the water, and it honors one another's health. So that's just a brief message on, what the power of coming together and trusting one another and caring for each other's health has brought us here to this conversation so that we can understand how to make those better decisions. So thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you for that, Tiffany. So my name's Nicole Banks, and this is my husband, Wagoosh Banks. We met all of these can you hear me okay? So we met all these lovely spring supporters, and we wanted to help because we were going out to get water with our family and kind of like having that space take us away from our daily stressors in the city. And I feel very encouraged to see all of you young people today and the instructors that are advocating for you to learn these things. My husband wanted to sing a song. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit or give a little background quickly?
Yeah. Hi, how you guys doing? My name is Wagoosh Banks. I'm an active member with the American Indian Movement. I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota here, and then I don't know. I just like to thank everybody for coming out and supporting, my wife and Chesney and the other guys here. There's a lot of them, but just thank you guys. And I would just like to, remind everybody that, that what I do is I go out to the spring, and I like my wife said, I do it to ground. I do it to, relieve the stress that I have going on, in the city, but also that, that the water is there, and it's that, it's really purifying. I like going there. It's the only purified water we have in a very long time, but I would like to sing a song for that water to hopefully, that's not forgotten. Give me one.
Just hold it then. Okay.
This is a prayer song that I was taught a while back. It's just a song that goes out to the prayers of or you're singing to the spirits, and then there was a lot of spirits there at the spring, so it did. Okay, and then it kind of it drew the spirits. So I know that this place has a really good spiritual connection. So I just want to sing for it.
So Rebecca, did you want to come up? We're totally wrapping up. I think Dr. Strak and Dr. Alexander left. So is there any burning question? Let me see a hand if there's a burning question. Okay. So with that, we can close down Zoom, and then we're going to bring Rebecca to some words for volunteering and learning more. Thank you to everyone online for attending, and we will be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.